stars rather than cloud.
Okay, so I think before I begin, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a link to the slides that I'm going to be presenting in the chat. So these are just the kind of stripped down version without any kind of animations or any color. It's easier to read and the file size is a lot smaller, okay? But let me know if anybody can't access those slides, okay? So my major focus today is that if you can just follow along with the things that I'm saying. So don't worry about taking notes because that's the purpose of me giving you the slides, okay? But let me start screen sharing and then we'll go ahead and get started, okay? Okay, so thanks everybody for attending this workshop on effective argumentative writing. So as Tasha noted, I'm Michael Luisi. I teach literature in the Arts and Humanities division, so a little bit different from some of the other colleges where literature is taught out of language arts, usually, okay? So today I'm going to be talking about argumentative writing, and that requires what I'm going to start off with is by talking about trying to give some definitions so that we kind of have a baseline understanding about some of the nuts and bolts, the foundations of argumentative writing. And then we'll go into some of the kind of tips or tricks that I would recommend that you kind of consider so that you can develop your writing and make it more effective, okay? Now, one thing too, as I kind of go through this presentation, I kind of conceived of this as being dialogic so that we can have a conversation or a dialogue. So, please chime in. If you have also questions, feel free to stop me. I've timed the presentation, so we'll come in under an hour. So there's time for questions either during the presentation or after it as well, okay? Okay, so what is a thesis? So I know that many of you, especially those who are from my classes, you've already met the prerequisite of English 100 or its equivalent in some, at some time earlier. So what is a thesis? What have you guys been told? Any thoughts, any ideas?
Like an introduction to the idea of what you're talking about.
Okay, good. An introduction to the topic or the issue you're going to be talking about? Good. Anything else? Or any characteristics that you associate with a thesis?
Like a question that you might, like a question regarding the subject that you want to discuss.
Yeah, exactly, right. Like you're trying to solve maybe a problem, right? You're trying to figure out something, right? Some kind of issue. So yeah, I mean, it's all of those things. I think too, a thesis, oftentimes when you're talking about thesis, you're often talking about a generalization or an essential idea, right? And what you're doing is like an introduction, you're preparing the readers or your audience for the details that are going to follow, right? Because we have many different ideas, but they should all support one central idea, right? And that central idea is your thesis. So I think for yourself as a writer, to keep it easy and clean for yourself, think about, well, what's the one main point that I want to advance, right? Closely related to this idea about a thesis is this concept of an argument. Now, does anybody know what an argument is? I know that some of you have had this before. Comes up in English like 100 pretty frequently. It's clear.
It's like a stance. And not an opinion.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a stance, right? And yeah, there are different things that we have to be aware of when we're creating an argument, right? So an argument is in fact different from a statement of opinion, okay? So when we think about it, an argument is just an opinion, but here's the catch. It's an opinion, but one that you can actually prove with evidence, right? You can prove it through a chain of logic. So when you think about arguments in regard to writing, there are things that you have to be aware of, right? Oops, so let me go back. you have to think about evidence. You have to start preparing to gather evidence to prove the claim that your opinion, right? So it's not, and I'm going to elaborate on this whole issue about opinion. Like, how does opinion differ from an argument? Okay. Okay, so what is evidence? Well, basically, the way we can think about evidence is just information, but it can be confirmed and it can be verified, right? So it's not just random information, right? You're using in service of something, and that's your argument. And you're also using it to prove or disprove something, right? A hypothesis, right? So Yvette kind of pointed out, right, that it's, you know, you might be trying to solve a problem, right? Or trying to find out something, right? And this is exactly the you know, why you would want evidence, right? Information to prove a point, right? How does something work? A hypothesis is a conjecture, an idea about how something might work, and you have to go ahead and prove it, just like in science, right? The other function of evidence is to establish your credibility as a writer, right? You know, people want to know that the argument that you are advancing, right, not only has evidence to it, but they can believe you, that you know what you're talking about, that you looked at the issue from multiple angles, right? And that your opinion is an informed one, okay? So that also is part of, remember, when we talk about argumentative writing, since you're trying to advance an opinion with evidence, you're basically, you know, when you want to think about it, it's an art, it's an act of persuasion, right? It's what's called rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of persuasion. How do you convince somebody of something, right? Through language. Okay, so when we think about the connections or the argument or the relationships between arguments and evidence, there are some things you really want to consider. An argument, then, because it's an opinion, you should have two sides to this thing, right? So that's the real acid test. When in my class, when I ask students to develop an argumentative claim for their thesis, ask yourself, can you argue for or against it? If you can't argue for or against it, you probably don't have an argument, okay? Now, when you're writing a thesis, you're only going to take one side of that argument, right? But there should be two sides, though, okay? Now, kind of backtracking a little bit, so we talked about how a thesis or an argument is a statement of opinion, but one that can be supported by evidence. You need to be aware of two pitfalls, right? When you're developing an argument. These are like rhetorical dead ends. They're going to get you in trouble when you start to write, okay? So if you can think ahead about some of these things, hopefully you'll develop not only a stronger paper, but one where you're actually not wasting a lot of time, right, when you're actually kind of developing it in its early beginnings, okay? So pitfalls, statement of opinion. So there's a difference between a statement of opinion and an argument. Statements of opinion don't rely on evidence. You cannot prove or disprove them, right? It's just about how somebody feels about something. There's no varying opinions about this thing, okay? And that's the big problem, right? Is that everybody has an opinion about something. And that's fine. You know, this is not some kind of prohibition against free speech, but you need evidence. If you want to be persuasive, the most persuasive thing that you can do is to present evidence for your case, okay? Opinions, you can't argue them, right? That's why they're dead ends. And people who are skeptical aren't going to believe you if you don't have evidence. So for example, you know, so sometimes I think examples are more useful than actually me giving you the kind of the quote unquote rule. But let's take a look at this example. So Cherry Garcia is Ben & Jerry's best flavor of ice cream. How do you prove that? If someone were to make that claim, how do you prove something like that?
By maybe like sales, like records.
Okay. So one thing, I mean, and this is where I think nuance in language is important. So that's a good point, Milo, but I think it would be different if you say Cherry Garcia is Ben & Jerry's best flavor of ice cream versus if you were to say Cherry Garcia is Ben & Jerry's best-selling ice cream, Because then you can prove that. You can prove, right, by number of units sold, right? That's exactly what you would be able to prove. But here, the way it's written here, it's the best. Like, you know, you can't, that's just how somebody feels, right? And you can't really like argue against that, right? So think about that. That's actually a good point, Milo, because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You can massage a thesis sometimes, or an argument to make it, or an opinion to make it an argument, right? Sometimes it requires some refinement, but then you can, that's how a lot of times in, like, for example, in my classes, you can shape an opinion into an argument, okay? So don't be so quick to like throw all your ideas out. Okay? Similar thing like this, like the MacBook Pro is a superior computer compared to the Dell Inspiron. Well, it depends on how we're defining superior, but if you're just meaning like what you like, then there's no arguing against it. But if you're arguing that it's the more reliable computer, you can prove that, right? You can look at fail rates, right, through tests, things like that. So be careful about what you're actually saying. Take a look at what you're saying, okay? Try to stay away from statements of opinion. See if you can refine the opinion into something that you can prove with evidence, and that will then become an argument, okay? Okay, an obvious claim, and I see this actually quite a lot, more frequently than statements of opinion in my classes. An obvious claim. So an obvious claim, so it's a lot of text here, so don't worry about getting it all down. Just try to understand the main issue, because I gave you the slides, right? The problem with obvious claims is that they seem arguable, but the problem is that they're basically statements of fact. And then you just run out of evidence pretty quickly, right? A lot of times what will happen in, for example, like literature, it happens quite a lot. If you have an obvious claim for your thesis, what will frequently happen is that people will lapse into plot summary, right? You'll just start repeating what the plot is, what's going on in the story, but you're not actually developing an argument, okay? And the problem with that is that there's no varying opinions about that. So the whole paper becomes summary, okay? And I'll give you an example of this. Like, you know, the Catholic Church convicted Galileo of heresy for promoting the theory of heliocentrism. When you think about it, that's exactly what he did. So there's no argument here, right? To give a more kind of basic example would be, for example, if I were to say something like, it's sunny out today. Well, there's no arguing against that, right? I mean, there might be some areas where there's some shade or something, but you know, it is sunny out. So be careful about like how you frame your thesis, okay? Make sure that it has two sides to it, okay? Okay, so an arguable claim. Again, remember, you're trying to convince your audience of something, maybe perhaps to change their minds about something or to urge them to do something, right? Ideally, what you want to take up is some topic where there are no easy answers, right? And that's a lot of times what your instructors want to see, right? They want to see critical thinking. And the truth is the world is complicated. There's rarely going to be like, you know, when it comes to arguments, there's rarely going to be like a right or wrong. Okay, but that's good because for you, from the position of a writer, we'll have lots to say, right? I think we've been in situations before where we've started writing and we're wondering, I don't know if I'm going to meet the word limit for this assignment. But I think if you think about it as an issue about developing an argument and then supporting it with evidence, you should have plenty to say. And the other thing to think about for the future, right, is that don't just advance your arguments and present your evidence in support of your thesis. That's important. You need to do that. But also, too, maybe later in your essay or later in your paper, is to think about counter arguments. How would you respond to somebody who's skeptical of your position, right? If they don't believe you and you're going to have to do a lot of convincing, you know, think about that in advance. Build that into your paper. Right? So that even gives you more things to talk about, right? So addressing counter arguments is an important part of argumentative writing, okay? Yeah. So just as I said right there, so acknowledge and respond to possible counter arguments. Okay, any questions so far about anything I'm presenting? No, okay. Okay, so let's try out take a look at some thesis statements, some sample thesis statements. Now, I'm telling you right now, so the couple of examples that I'm going to show you are not good thesis statements. Let's try to figure out like why, okay? Okay, so in this paper, I will discuss Julie Otsuka's use of the color white in her novel When the Emperor Was Divine. What's the problem with this thesis statement?
It's kind of vague. Doesn't really say what she's gonna like try to talk about. Like, yeah, use the color white, but like in what way? Like, what is she gonna try to convey?
Exactly, right? There's no argument there. There's no side. It just says that what she's going to talk about, right? She's going to talk about the use of the color white. Well, what about the use of the color white, right? So I mention that because I do see that pretty commonly, pretty frequently, right? Well, people will say something, make a statement like this, or even if they take out the early part, even if they take out in this paper I will discuss, and they say that, their topic or issue is going to be Julie Otsuka's use of the color white in her novel. Okay, well, what about it? What do you want us to know? That the color white is a symbol of innocence in the novel? If you say that you can prove that, right, with evidence. You can go do a close reading of the text where, white, emerges as an important symbol of innocence, right, or innocence taken. But you have to take the extra step, right? Don't just leave it like this, okay? Let's take a look at another example. Julie Otsuka, uses the color white in her novel When the Emperor Was Divine. This is more or less the same thing, right? So be careful that just because you shuffle language around, shuffle syntax, a word order, doesn't make a statement more argumentative. Really get down to the nuts and bolts. Can you argue for or against the statement? If you cannot, then you don't have an argument. Okay, so keep it really simple for yourself. Okay. I think sometimes people get tied up in knots because they don't ask that one simple question. Okay, if you start from the beginning, start very kind of early and think about what it is you're trying to prove, you can save yourself a lot of heartache and time later, okay? Okay, so you're not looking for a general subject or topic for a paper, right? So let's keep that in mind. Try to make a specific point, right? Something that you can argue for or against. You're taking a stance. Okay. Okay, let's try a couple of more examples. How about this one? So Julie Otsuka prominently uses the color white in her novel When the Emperor Was Divine when describing the color of the mother's gloves. What's the problem with this one?
It's giving you a fact, or like it's not giving you any argument at all.
Yeah, exactly. It's expository, just describing something, right? Explaining something that's like a fact, right? And then how about for this one? Julie Otsuka prominently uses the color white in her novel When the Emperor Was Divine when describing the color of the mother's gloves and the color of the family dog.
Same thing, just adds the dog.
More of the same.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I have seen where sometimes students will add some extra words or some details, but it doesn't, again, get back to brass tack, get back to basics. This addition doesn't make it the claim any more argumentative than the previous one. It's almost the same, right? It's very similar, right? So same thing, like ask yourself the fundamental question, can you argue for or against this? Okay, so try to delve to, this is actually one of the reasons why the University of Hawaii and other colleges require writing intensive courses, right? Is because what they're really trying to get at through writing, especially argumentative writing, is they want to provoke you to critically think, right? They want you to delve beneath the facts. They want to know that there's some kind of understanding about this issue, this deep understanding, not just what happens, but why they happen, okay? Because at some point, you're going to leave the university system and finish college, and you're going to be on your own. And we want to know that the skills that we help provide you, you will be able to use in your own life, whether it's in the workforce or if it's more academic training, whatever it is, okay? So delve beneath the facts, ask why things happen, not just what happens, okay? Okay, let's take a look at this statement and then we'll kind of finish up with its evaluating thesis statement. So Julia Tsuka prominently uses the color white in her novel When the Emperor Was Divine to underscore the family's innocence and how that innocence was destroyed by the wartime incarceration of Japanese Americans. So this is kind of similar. We've had elements of this before. So I'm telling you that this is a good thesis, but where is the actual argument here?
When she says to underscore there's a stance on why she used the color white.
Yeah, exactly, right. To underscore the family's innocence. She's making a statement, right? She's taking a position, right? That Julia Tsuka uses the color white to make a point about the family's innocence and how it was destroyed, right? Exactly. Okay. So that's a good example. And so, again, really think about why why something happens. In this case, it's about like why the author, right, Julia Tsuka, uses this color, not just the fact that she does, right? So sometimes too, be aware about the language you use. I have also seen where students might have had arguments, but they needed to be nuanced. They needed to actually come out and state the claim. So I needed to help them a little bit, right? Refine the claim so that it sounds, in fact, like an argument, okay? So be aware of that. So sometimes, again, like I said before, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't throw away everything, all the ideas that you have. Though you might have to, but hopefully not. And see if you can massage it or kind of craft it into something that is an argument, okay? Usually there's something there that you can use, okay? Okay, so a couple other issues to consider when you're crafting a thesis. It is important to determine whether or not you're actually being asked to take a stance or a position on an issue, right? I'll give you an example. So it's pretty common in English 100 or even in speech classes to give what's called an expository essay, right? So you basically are there to describe something that happens. In speech, this is pretty common. You might be asked to give a speech about something, describe something. And, I've seen in the past where, students have given speeches and they have to write it up first, right? But like how an SLR camera works, or what are the steps involved with baking a cake or something, right? Now, you're not taking a stance on that. That's just expository. That's just descriptive, okay? But that's fine. Not all writing assignments are argumentative, so be clear about what you're being asked to prove or do, okay? Because if you're not being asked to create an argument, then you don't have to worry about all this stuff, right? About taking a side. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead. Also, too, if you are seeking to argue for or against an issue, remember that evidence is really necessary to substantiate your position, right? So again, for the expository or descriptive essays, you don't need evidence per se, right? It's not, there might be details like what are the steps involved with baking a cake, like what temperature to, set the oven to, what are the ingredients, for example, all those kinds of things. But that's not evidence in the same way. It's not proving something, okay? So just be clear, because there are different types of writing assignments you'll be asked to do throughout your college career, and not all of them are going to be arguments. I'll give you another example, like in history. If you're taking a history class, it's pretty common for history instructors to ask you to do a book report or book review. And that's not, unless they're asking for an opinion at the end, generally you're just providing a summary, right? And that's different from an argument. Okay, so I want to talk next about types of evidence. So we all come to writing from different positions, from different disciplines. And different disciplines have different expectations about evidence and what counts as appropriate evidence, okay? So you have to really wear different hats. And it's hard, I know it's like kind of maybe complicated at times, but you have to remember that if you're writing, for example, in a sociology class, what counts as evidence is going to look different from what counts as evidence in, say, like a literature class or a history class, okay? So just be aware of that. So I'm going to go through different types of evidence that you should kind of be aware of. So there are arguments to make in the natural sciences, right? There are arguments that are called hypotheses. But things that count as evidence, scientific or historical evidence, right? Like, for example, the atomic number of gold is 79, or Hawaii became an official state on August 21st, 1959. This is kind of historical evidence, right? Statistics. I think this is outdated now. Nearly 6 out of 10 households own DVD players. I got to update my slides. I don't know. I think more people like stream stuff now. Expert opinions also count, right? You know, it could be from the natural sciences, for example, right? And it could be text-based. Like, so for those of you, I know several of you from my literature classes, so the type of evidence there is going to look a little bit different. It's textual evidence, right? Like, what does a particular character do? What happens in a particular, you know, the plot of a text? Those kinds of things. Like, you know, if you're taking my class in English 271 and we're reading The Great Gatsby, right? You're talking about like Nick Carraway moving back to the Midwest to avoid materialism and the superficiality associated with New York City. You can prove that. You can try to explain that, like why does he move back there, right? He kind of says it too. So these are some different disciplines besides history and literature that you can also or should also think about what constitutes evidence. So biological sciences, for example, would be data from site studies or site surveys, observations of specimens it could be things like with special equipment like microscopes, observations and measurements made in experimental settings, data taken from reports from other biologists in publications. That's why too, like if you read, like, for example, scientific journals, right? Or journals in any discipline, that's a good example of what people in the discipline considers to be appropriate evidence. But business, you know, reports, proposals, executive summaries, memos and correspondence, presentations, brochures and newsletters, news articles, even like, you know, oftentimes too, if you're in business, you know, they have annual stock meetings for, you know, publicly owned or companies. Those, I've seen people use evidence taken from those things too, okay, for business. If you're in education, things like reflective essays, journals and field notes, curriculum designs and lesson plans, reviews of instructional materials, case studies, research papers, self-evaluations, portfolios, academic journals, right? So notice one of the things I want to point out is that evidence can come in different shapes and sizes, so to speak, right? It can be quantitative, but it doesn't have to be, okay? It could be qualitative. So psychology, quantitative, like stats, right? From experiments or surveys. Qualitative evidence, right, which counts like descriptions of behavior or physical appearance or interview responses. Those are qualitative evidence, right? It's not quantitative, it's not numbers, right? But it's basically like descriptions. Okay, so I'm gonna shift away from evidence. And here's something that I think is one of the most important things I want to, talk about, especially for my classes, but I think it's for a lot of instructors too, is that you want to think about the connection between your thesis and the rest of your paper. So your body paragraphs. So one of the best ways to do that is to think about the use of topic sentences, okay? And the use of topic sentences to organize your evidence. So a topic sentence, basically, if you think about it, is basically like a mini thesis. It's a mini thesis for a particular body paragraph. Okay, so you have your thesis. Usually it's embedded in an introductory paragraph, right? And then you have a series of body paragraphs that fall underneath it. Well, generally speaking, the first one or a couple of sentences of each body paragraph should state the point of that paragraph. Like, what are you trying to prove in that paragraph? Okay, you should know. So couple things. It's not just announcing like the point of the paragraph, but also too, it's a connection back to your thesis. So that's why topic sentences can be tricky, because they're also transitions, right? Because here's the thing, if you don't have clear topic sentences, the point of your paragraph, the body paragraph, will be lost on your audience and they won't understand. It's just going to look like a big laundry list of stuff. Topic sentences are really functional, right? They're not superficial. They're really functional to how an audience reads and understands your essay, okay? If you don't have good topic sentences, I can guarantee you an audience will get lost, okay? And if they're lost, that means you're not controlling the writing situation. And if that's happening, you're already losing the battle of trying to persuade people, okay? So there are a couple of functions to a topic sentence, as I kind of stated. So it kind of restates in portion or with more specificity the claim of your paper, right? You're making a point or an argument of some sort, but you're also kind of indicating where you're going to go next. And let me give you some examples. I think the examples in some ways are more useful than the actual, the generalization here. Okay, so the last bulleted point on this slide here. So topic sentences, they do a couple things. They indicate a topic or a focus, a point that you're trying to make. And then two, they're indicating a controlling idea or connection, like where are you going to go next? Okay, so let's take a look at some samples here, okay? So these are going to be a couple of sample topic sentences, and we'll go through them. But try to figure out, like, based on the topic sentence that I give you, what point do you think is being made in this paragraph based on the topic sentence? You should be able to figure it out, okay? And then where it's going to go next. Okay, so if this is your topic sentence, air pollution in Mexico City is the worst in the world for a number of reasons. What do you think the point of this paragraph is? If this is your topic sentence, what's the rest of the paragraph going to do or say?
It's going to give reasons for why Mexico City is the worst for air pollution.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so the point of the paragraph is air pollution in Mexico City being the worst in the world, right? So that's your topic, right, for this body paragraph. And the rest of the paragraph is exactly right. So it's going to be about enumerating or identifying the different reasons it's the worst in the world, right? So notice you did two things really quickly in one small sentence, one short sentence, right? You're indicating the topic and then where you're going to go. And that's ideally what you want to do for every body paragraph. You should have a topic sentence. Okay, it's not even a question. You should have one. Okay, that's how functional it is to your paper. Okay, let's try another one. So if this is your topic sentence, fixing a flat tire on a bicycle is easy if you follow these steps. So if this is your topic sentence for your body paragraph, what is the point of this paragraph? What is it trying to prove or to say?
That it's easy to change a flat tire
Yeah,
on a bicycle.
exactly. Fixing it, right? How easy it is to fix a flat tire on a bicycle. And what do you expect the rest of the paragraph to do or to say then?
Provide the
Follow in the
steps.
directions.
Yep, the steps, exactly, right? The steps involved with fixing a flat tire on a bike, right? Exactly. So, and let's do one more, okay? Let's skip that one. Let's try the last one. Effective leadership requires specific qualities that anyone can develop. So if this is your topic sentence, what's the paragraph about?
The specific qualities that anyone can develop.
Yeah, well, effective leadership, yeah? What do you expect the rest of the paragraph to do or to say?
It'll list the specific qualities they're talking about.
Exactly, right? So the big topic here for this paragraph would be effective leadership, right? And then the rest of the paragraph will be about how do you develop those qualities, right? Those specific qualities, okay? So notice here, it's one thing that we can do it as, an example together, right? But the real trick is for yourself, when you're writing your body paragraphs, think about like what it is you're trying to say in each paragraph. Make a point, okay? Don't just keep writing and don't just add like a bunch of details. Think about the function each paragraph has to your thesis, okay? Now, well, before I kind of move to the next part, which is going to be on complications, does anybody have any questions about topic sentences? Okay, so for my students, I'm going to tell you right now, that is like one of the most important things I'm going to be looking for in your essays, okay? So you should have good topic sentences, okay? Make sure that they're arguments, okay? Don't just move to the next thing. And definitely, here's what I don't want to see, right, in your topic sentences. It shouldn't be a statement of fact, right? So if you're going to say, let's say that your topic sentence is, the Kumo Lipo is the Hawaiian creation and genealogy chant. Okay, that's great, but that's what it is. So that's not like a good topic sentence. It's not an argument, right? So you have to think more carefully about like, well, what point are you trying to prove? A topic sentence is an argument. It's just one that's connected as a smaller argument that's connected to your big argument, which is your thesis, okay? It's kind of like a Russian doll situation, right? The big Russian doll on the outside would be your thesis. Inside are like the body paragraphs, each smaller doll, okay? Each paragraph, though, has a function, and you need to explain the function of those paragraphs to the thesis, to the big Russian doll, okay?
Yes.
Okay, so let's now move on to effective uses of evidence in terms of complication. So I'm going to give you an example of an outline, an essay outline. You don't need to know, it's going to be based on nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe. You don't need to know anything about it. It's just an example, okay? But take a look. Okay. Let's take a look at the thesis first. The resurgence of nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe is the result of conflicts emerging from Brubaker's triadic nexus. Like whatever, we don't care. Okay, so it's argument. Just take my word. It's an argument. Look at the body paragraphs, though. What do you notice about the body paragraphs? What do the body paragraphs have in common?
Talking about the triadic nexus. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah, exactly. The triadic nexus, right? So they're all, and notice that the first body paragraph is about Weimar Germany as a product of the triadic nexus. Second body paragraph would be Czechoslovakia as a product of the triadic nexus. The third body paragraph is Latvia as a product of the triadic nexus. And then fourth body paragraph is Serbia as a product of the triadic nexus. But they're all talking about the triadic nexus. But here's the problem. This looks very monotonous, right? This looks like it's more or less saying the same thing over and over, but using different examples. This is what I would consider to be a poorly constructed essay, right? Because you're not really complicating anything. You're just saying different things, using different examples, but basically saying the same thing. There's a difference, right, between And this is where it can get a little tricky, but you really want to, what I would recommend though, is to think about like what points you need to make to support your thesis. And you want to be in a different position at each time. So, when I describe it to my students, think about your essay as like a spiral staircase or like a helix, right? On a spiral staircase, on each step, you're at a slightly different position, right? You're not just saying the same thing over and over and over, which is like going in a circle. You're actually bringing up new issues, right? Or you should be in each body paragraph, different subclaims, right? And not just different evidence. So at each step on the rung of that spiral staircase, you should see the issue and present the issue in a slightly different way. That's what I mean by complication, okay? So a lot of times when you have like a thesis and then you have like what looks like a very flat essay that just repeats itself, that essay it's kind of simplistic, right? It doesn't really develop the issue sufficiently, okay? So it will likely seem very repetitive to an audience, okay? So think about, and this is why the topic sense issue is so important. Think about your body paragraphs as presenting different arguments, and that's really key, different arguments that are connected to your main argument, which is your thesis, okay? And that makes your essay look like it's thought out, right? That you've really thought through the issue. It looks well-rounded, okay? Like you've considered the issue from multiple angles, okay? And not just the one that you happen to adopt. That's why counter arguments are sometimes very good, right? Even if there's a position that you don't agree with, you understand people's concerns or objections to it, right? And that but then you come back with your own reasons for why those counter arguments are not very good arguments, okay? Okay, so think about this. This is the example of a revision, right, to the previous outline that we saw, okay? The thesis is more or less the same, except that it adds this one part. However, conflicts also emerge from factors other than the triadic nexus. So in other words, it's not just the triadic nexus, there's other stuff going on. And these other things, that other stuff is nationalizing states, national minorities, external national homelands, right? And then you can give examples, right? For example, like Latvia. You can also look at things like, we saw things similar to that before, but really think again about creating different, think of your body paragraphs as presenting sub-arguments, okay? And if you do it right, those topic senses should be your sub-arguments. So don't say the same thing over and over using different evidence. This is why I would highly recommend to everybody, and I do this too now. I never used to believe it. I used to think it was a waste of time, but outline your paper. It doesn't mean it has to be really formal, like Roman numerals and all that. It can just be bullet points, but at least try to figure out where you're going. If you kind of chart out, if you kind of map out what you want to say ahead of time, you can figure out and see early on whether you're being repetitive, whether you're saying the same thing using different examples. And then you can change it, right, before you actually do a lot of writing, okay? It actually saves you time. So people sometimes think that outlining is a waste of time. It's actually a time saver, not a time waster, right? Because you can see the pitfalls, some of the pitfalls early on before you get there, okay? Okay, I'm going to jump ahead here. Okay, so recapping then. So we're about at the end here. Okay, so remember, ask yourself, so not just for people in my class, I'm hoping that this workshop would be useful for people in any number of disciplines where argumentative writing is really involved, okay? But think again, ask yourself what are you being asked to do with the piece of writing you're being asked to produce? Is it in fact an argument or not, right? If you are creating an argument, then it's something that you have to be able to prove or disprove. So you have to take a stance on the issue, okay? You should be able to argue for or against it. Okay, so keep it simple. Right, so also too, as a kind of really kind of important caveat or warning about that, remember to try to avoid either a statement of opinion or statement of fact when you're crafting your thesis, okay? Investigate why things happen, not what happens. Okay. Remember too that what counts as evidence, that can take many different forms, and it's really dependent upon the discipline that you're writing from, right? What looks like evidence in the natural sciences is going to look different from what evidence looks like in the humanities. So be willing to wear different hats. If you don't know, here's the thing. If you don't know, let's say you're writing for anthropology, right, which is a social science, ask your instructor, what counts as evidence? Because remember too, anthropology is interesting. Anthropology is a science. It's a science about humans, and it can be about human development. But it also, there's cultural anthropology, and then there's the more like biological anthropology. So the biological will tend more toward the, use of numbers, right? Statistics. The cultural one will be more qualitative evidence, okay? Remember to use topic sentences, okay? Remember that the use of topic sentences announces to your audience what the point of that paragraph is and its connection to your thesis. So remember that in your topic sentence, you're announcing the focus or the point of the body paragraph, and you're also identifying or making connection between the paper's claim and the evidence you will provide. Like, where are you going to go next, right? Just like we did in those examples. Also remember to, when you're crafting your body paragraphs, remember to try to complicate your thesis. Don't just restate evidence, okay? Don't say the same thing over and over again. Okay, so that's it. That was my last slide. Okay, does anybody have any questions or things I can help with?
Just to ask for clarification. When you say complicate our body of paragraphs,
Mhm.
I'm trying to wrap my head around how I would complicate it. Is that by way of using a topic sentence that triggers a complicated thought process?
No, I don't, not necessarily. I think what it is that by complication means that you're not just restating yourself, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, you're not coming back to the same issue, but just using different language to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Using different, because I've seen it
yeah,
before,
okay.
it happens. So like using different evidence, right? Because that outline that I showed you guys, that's from an actual paper, okay? So it can happen if you're not real careful, especially what tends to happen is when people don't leave enough time to write the thing and they just jam it out, right? And whatever comes to your brain is what comes to your brain, right? And in 5-minute meltdown, or like I should maybe say maybe like 40-minute meltdown, if you're writing your paper that quickly, a lot of times what comes to your brain is summary, like the facts that you know, right? So you won't think ahead about like, okay, well, here's this other issue I need to talk about to prove my case, and it's different from the ones I've made earlier. That's the way I would think about complication.
Okay.
Yeah, does that make sense? You bet.
It does. It's just like thinking about your topic from different angles instead of repetitive.
Yeah, exactly.
And how you write it out. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So you, did you state that we should think about the arguments before deciding a thesis to make sure we have enough supporting arguments?
It might help. I don't know that that's, I don't know that you have to figure everything out, but at least try to figure out, like, one, obviously think about what your big thesis is, start there. And then you might want to test the waters, then do it by outline. Don't right? Because that's where the outline can save you time. You'll kind of figure out ahead of time what the pitfalls are, right? If there are any. Or if it might be difficult, for example, to find particular evidence, right? I've written essays where I basically wrote myself into a metaphorical corner, right? I started writing. I didn't really think ahead of time, like what kind of evidence I would need. And then when I started to write and I actually got to those body pairs, like, oh, damn, I don't have like, the evidence I have is not really persuasive. It's not like credible. And I could have figured that out if I had outlined, right? So that's where I think the beauty of outlines come in. But yeah, I don't know that you need to figure out ahead of time all the time, but I do think like a quick outline would be best. I do think that can be useful.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
When writing, what's the difference between persuasive and argumentative?
I don't think there is a difference. I mean, they're both, yeah, argument is persuasion, is a type of persuasion, right? It's just that argument uses, this is a long philosophical tradition, but basically argument relies on evidence, is the simple way to put it. Persuasion, you can BS about anything, right? And you don't even have to have evidence, right? We hear people say that like all the time, right? Where they say things that aren't true, and there's no evidence for it. And that's not an argument, right? That's just
Opinions. I
Yeah.
get it. Okay. So there is a difference then. Like,
Yeah.
like if I were to, like I wrote a persuasive paper years ago, but I felt like the way we're talking about it today is different. Like my position needs to be proved versus like when I talked about being a vegan, you know, there was a lot of persuasive words that I used, and I did prove a lot with used a lot of evidence, but half of what I said was my opinion.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think an issue like that, for example, you could probably go find evidence if you had more time, right?
Yeah, it was half and half.
Right. Yeah. But I think that for arguments, yeah, you definitely want to have evidence for everything you say, right?
Okay,
Or-
so when writing our paragraphs, if we state the evidence, is it okay to slip in an opinion?
I would avoid it, only
Okay.
because
Okay,
yeah, that's like being kind of pregnant, you know, like there's no such thing. You either are or you're not. So I would say that, you know, when you say something, it doesn't mean you have to like, look, you don't need like parenthetical citations or page numbers for every single thing that you say.
that's what
But
I'm
when you're-
asking.
Yeah, when you're making a claim which can be proven or disproven, then you need evidence,
Okay,
right? So for example, like if you're saying you're writing a paper about, I don't know, the Wingord of La'amama, and you're saying that the Ali'i, Keawe Nui Aumi, he's a poor leader, right? You can support that with evidence. You can go find where he's like a derelict, or you know, he's not like an unresponsive leader, and go find that in the text. But you don't have to prove, for example, that he's an ali'i, right? You don't need to prove that to me. That's a known fact. So basically, and you can ask a lot of instructors too, basically things that are kind of known facts you don't have to prove. You know, certain things like so-and-so is, you know, the name of somebody, a character that, or they do this or do that in a particular text, right? In a literature class, right? You don't have to prove that stuff. It's the
Okay.
arguments, the things that are not clear cut, right? That are in fact could be perceived as being subjective, then you have to prove those things.
okay, I got it. Yeah, because you could end up going down a rabbit hole if you tried.
Yeah, because then
prove
you're
every-
citing everything. Every sentence then has like parenthetical citation or quotation. You don't need to do that, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good question. No, I've kind of been in that situation too. Like, do I need to prove this? I don't know, right? Okay, any other questions? No. Okay, so thanks everybody for coming today. I hope this was useful for you. please complete the survey that Casey put into the chat. Okay. That's especially for my students who are trying to collect extra credit, then definitely make sure to complete that survey, because then I'll know, I'll get the report back that you attended. Okay. Okay. Thanks everybody for coming today during your lunch hour.
Thank you.
Yes, and
Thank
if
you.
you're interested and you have time, next week, we'll have success skills with study skills. So feel free to join us. And thank you so much, Professor Oishi.
Thanks, Professor Oishi.
Thanks, Milo.
Bye-bye.
Take care.